spoilers. I'll let Osmany and Patrick present the book. But I'd like to highlight that each of you that want to read the book, it will be at your disposal at the portal on the internet. We will give you all the indications, all the directions for you to have the book and read it. Please spread the word. Tell your friends about the book. We will be really welcome. We will be really happy to see you using the book while at school or any other place you want to use it. All our meetings will be recorded and will be live broadcast to the LabOP YouTube channel. So you will be able to see it again. And also, I'd like to tell you that there will be simultaneous interpretation. So those of you who have any issues in listening to us in English, you can choose on the button on your Zoom window. It's called interpretation. You can choose in which language you will be with us, in English or in Portuguese. This feature is not on the YouTube channel. People at the YouTube channel will be only listening in English. And any question, any comments you have, you are free to send them to us. Send them to us on our chat window, or for those who are watching us in the YouTube channel, you can write on the comment box, and we will try as most as possible. We will try to answer you during our sessions. Osmany, I think the floor is yours now.
So, thank you very much, Regina, for introducing this cycle of webinars. Thank you as well, all the staff at the ENAP for all the work done preparing this cycle of webinars, and also for the partnership with this book. I would like also to thank everyone who's watching our webinar today. It's, of course, a great pleasure for me to welcome you in this cycle of webinars about this subject that we like a lot, which is the political sociology of public action. As Regina mentioned, in the following weeks, we are going to discuss the main contributions of the French approaches to policy studies. This webinar is a partnership, as she mentioned, between ENAP, the program of postgraduate studies at the Public Policy and Management of the University of São Paulo, and my lab, the Laboratory of International Public Policies at the Federal University of São Paulo. This cycle of webinars is also the opportunities to launch the book that Patrick and I have been organizing for the past 5 years or so. And the dynamics of this webinar in particular today is going to be the following. So I will first present the context of the book. Then I will hand over to Patrick to introduce you the main to introduce a general overview of the political sociology of public action. After that, I will present my chapter of the book, which is about policy circulation. And finally, Patrick will conclude presenting his chapter of the book about elites. So to start with the beginning, the idea and the work with this book dates back from 2015. when I was doing my postdoctoral research at the program of public policies and management at the University of São Paulo. And then we were discussing with colleagues about the approaches used in Brazil to study public policies. And it came that if the Anglo-Saxon concepts and streams of research were very well known, there was still a lack of use of French approaches. And in fact, if we observe all over the world the use of the cycle of public policies developed by Laswell, as well as the different types of policies presented by Lowy, the distributive, redistributive, regulatory, and notions such as the multiple streams approach of kingdom with the notion of stream window of opportunities and policy entrepreneurs, the advocacy coalitions approach by Jenkins and Sabatier. They are all often used by researchers in their work, and they are also used by professors to teach their students in graduate and undergraduate courses in public policies in Brazil, but also elsewhere. And of course, this is due to the fact that the Anglo-Saxons have been pioneers in the area, but also there is also a language barrier to access the production, the knowledge production, the insights prepared in other countries and in other languages. And this was until now in part the case of French approaches in Brazil. And French approaches are very interesting, and Patrick will explain this later, because he's one of the main figures, as you will see, in the sociology of public action. But there are some very interesting dynamics and dimensions of the French approaches to public policies. So they were also, as in other countries, developed in relation to the Anglophone approaches, but they included in their work the thought of important French intellectuals, such as Pierre Bourdieu, Michel Foucault, and Bruno Latour. And they also included insights from disciplines such as sociology, philosophy, and history. And this combination produced a very rich debate in French, and they started to call these approaches as the sociology of public actions. In these approaches, there are some issues and elements of policy studies that are not often at the core of the analysis in the Anglophone style of policy research. As for example, in the French approaches or the sociology of public actions, there is an important emphasis on the role of ideas, knowledge, organizations, and the transnational. What's also interesting about these approaches is the fact that it doesn't mean, even if they agree to some extent in a sort of combination of approaches, a certain combination of elements, they are not always they don't always agree with each other. So there are some divergent elements as well in the French scholarship. So in fact, there are different ways, for example, of defining public policies, as you can see in the book, with the pragmatic approaches that's used by Philippe Sitoun, that mobilize the notion of a dispositif device from Michel Foucault. They also diverge often in the ways to study public policies, for example, through social history, or by choosing the main object of analysis. In fact, some authors are studying the local policies, as you see in the book, the chapter written by Renaud Epstein. Others are using the notion of fields, champ de Pierre Bourdieu, and with the chapter, for example, of Vincent Dubois. There are also scholars that use the notion of gender, as Guy-Noël Perrier, which is also author of a chapter in the book. And she will also be with us in this cycle of webinars. So we started to think about how these approaches could enrich the discussions of policy studies here in Brazil. And up to this date, these approaches were very limited in Portuguese. For example, we have one book, the book of which is called Sociology of Public Action, that was written by Patrick Legalet and Pierre Lascombes. It was translated by the publisher of the Federal University of Alagoas a few years ago. So this was one option that we had. Another option was a special issue of the Revista Pós Ciências Sociais, the Reproduction of the Federal University of Maranhão, that brought a very interesting discussion also on policy instruments, but it was still very limited. And back there in 2015 and 2016, I started this discussion about the French approaches and how they could be, we could bring these approaches to the discussion in Brazil with my colleague at the University of São Paulo, Eduardo Caldas. Later on, we also invited Patrick and Gilles Massardier, who's often doing research here in Brazil, and Yves Surel, who is one of the main exponents of the role of ideas in public policy. So we invited them to these discussions, and we kind of understood that the field of policy studies was growing fast in Brazil, and that it would be interesting to increase the options of approaches for scholars, for students and people interested in policies in Brazil to have other options. So we started thinking of the book, and the book project was a selection of different approaches of the French scholarship in policy studies. And we started to find the authors at that time to write the chapters. We discussed the book in 2018 in a workshop in Paris, in the University of Paris 2, which was organized by Yves Surel. And most of the authors met there, and we decided, we discussed about the outline of the book. And I think that maybe we still have a picture of that moment somewhere. Maybe I can post in social media afterwards. But once we concluded this outline of the book, Patrick and I prepared the reviews for the chapters, and the book was finally consolidated in January of 2019. And most of this work was done during my stay as a visiting researcher at the Institut de Haute Étude de l'Amérique Latine of the University of Paris 3, where I spent 2 months, and we had different meetings, me and Patrick, to discuss the book. The result is a 21-chapter book with a marvelous preface signed by Pierre Muller, who is the author of the book State in Action, that was published in the 80s, and one of the main figures in the French policy studies. And I just have a copy here. Don't know if you can see. I just got yesterday from the publisher, and so this is it. I wanted in this presentation, this introduction, also to thank all the different partners of the book. I need to thank them. So first, I need to thank the Laboratoire Printemps of the Université de Versailles-Saint-Quentin-Paris-Saclay, where Patrick is based. I have also to thank the University of Paris 2, the PACT at the University of Grenoble, and the Center of European Studies at the University of Sciences Po Paris, Pact and the Center of European Studies were very important for the publication of the book. ENAP, who was a very important partner, and the institution that translated the book, and my lab at the Federal University of São Paulo, and the French Association of Political Science. So the book, as Regina mentioned, is free to download. I'm going to post a link here where you can download the book in the YouTube chat, but also in social media. If you follow the Laboratory of International Public Policies, LABOP, you can can find the link to download the book. Yes, basically this is what I wanted to present to you today. Maybe it was a little bit longer than expected, but I thought it was an important to tell the story, because it shows that the book is not just a book, but it has a story behind it, and it might be of interest for young scholars who are interested in publishing, starting their own publishing adventures, or seniors willing to begin a new adventure, and so on. And just a last thing before concluding and handing over to Patrick, I wanted to make clear that our idea is not to impose French approaches or to replace Anglo-Saxon theories. It's really far from that. We wanted to create an environment in public policy studies, an environment of plurality and diversity, and open the floor to new ways of to observe and analyze public policy. And we also encourage other colleagues to do this with approaches from elsewhere, other countries in Latin America, Africa, Asia, or even in Europe. It is finally an invitation to explore new approaches, to translate it in order to increase our capacity of knowledge production about public policies. So before handing now to Patrick, also for those who are on our YouTube channel, you might be interested on subscribing and activating the ring bell and to receive all the information of our lab. So that's it. Thank you very much. I open now the floor to Patrick. All the questions in this webinar are going to be written questions. So once we conclude this, we're going to open the floor for the questions, and you can write them in the chat for us. So Patrick, thank you very much again for your time and for being here with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Osmany. Thank you for the organization of the seminar. So I'm sharing the presentation. Yes, here it is. I have a PowerPoint presentation. So I'm very glad to have the opportunity to present our book. It was a very interesting and stimulating and nice collaboration we had during all these years, and Osmany explained that it took a long time, but we are very glad of the final product with this book, and we will have a further cooperation around these approaches. What I will present is two things, and first I will try to explain how it came to this notion of political sociology of public action, why it is the dominant perspective in French policy studies, and I will also the second aim of my rather short presentation is to explain this expression of political sociology of public action. What does it mean? So that's my point. I want to start with the distinction between policy analysis on the one side and policy studies on the other side, because what is called policy analysis refers to analysis not only on on public policy, but also for public policy. It was the initial perspective of policy sciences. So in this operational perspective for policy analysis, and this kind of perspective diffused in France was transferred from the United States, like in many other countries after the Second World War, when it was developed in the United States in the 1950s. In the 1950s, but in France it was mainly diffused in the state administration, but not that much in the universities. And this is a strong difference with the United States, where policy science and then policy analysis developed in universities, in the graduate schools of public policy. And the fact that it was not that much diffused and transferred into French university can be explained by the organization of the French higher education system, what is underlined here, because the French system is a dual system with, on the one side, you have university where research is made, and on the other side you have the so-called grandes écoles, institutions who train senior civil servants and state engineers. So there are several grandes écoles, and it cannot be translated by high school because it refers to something else. So it's in the higher education system, but it's outside the university, and it is separated from research, because research institutes are in the universities. So policy analysis developed in those grandes écoles, and that, but not in the universities. So the universities developed other kind of approaches, more rooted in social sciences and focused on policy studies. So studying the policy process, but not that much for the policy actor, and so in a more critical perspective on public policies. And that explains the role of sociology, what I will stress first. And then political science was the main discipline for policy studies, but with a strong connection to sociology, and that explained that we talk a lot about political sociology. And then I will explain the term public action when it came up, and why it is now mainly used in the social sciences. So first point, quickly, the role of sociology. Because policy studies in France developed in a sociological perspective, and mainly the perspective of organizational sociology, which was also transferred from the US, but by other kind of actors than policy analysis. And here the main figure is Michel Foucault, who spent a lot of time researching in the United States, and he read a lot organizational sociology, especially the work on administration, the sociological analysis of administration. And so it transferred the American studies, the American perspective to France in the late 1950s and the early 1960s, and he founded in 1964 the Center for Organizational Sociology at Sciences Po in Paris, and it was in that research institute that the first policy studies were made a few years later, in the early 70s, and policy studies focused on the role of the state, of administration at the top of senior civil servants in the policy process, but then later also at the bottom in policy implementation, and with also a great interest on the relation between the state administration at the local level and local elected politician in the implementation of public policies. So that bunch of work developed in the 1970s and 1980s, but they were mostly made by sociologists. So this pioneer role of the sociology of organization had a great influence on the methodologies used in policy studies in France, with a predominance of qualitative empirical work based on mostly interviews, observation, but also document analysis, and also using a more inductive perspective, with a great focusing a lot on the field work and empirical density of policy studies. And these methodologies were then used in political science. What I will stress in the next slide. I want to mention that Osmany already stressed that point, that later in the more recent years, and this is in the book, there are links with other sociological perspectives in the study of public policy, especially relation to the sociology of law. There is one chapter in the book, relation to the sociology of science and techniques, and the influence, especially for Bruno Latour, who Osmany mentioned. Also, a strong connection, growing connection with gender studies. Also, the use of pragmatist approaches, like this is in the chapter written by Philippe Zitoun. But in the 1980s, policy studies developed also in political science, and one of the main events was in 1981, the first roundtable on public policy organized by the French Association of Political Science, and then there was in 1985 the publishing of a handbook on political science in there were 4 different volumes, and one was dedicated to public policy. And so progressively, political science became the leading discipline for policy studies. And also, for instance, the first textbook on policy studies was published in 1989, and it was written by a political scientist. What explains this connection with the political science, this growing connection with political science, are two main factors, which are underlined here. The first one is the decentralization process of the French state, which started in the early 80s, and which has led to a great development and great increase of local public policy. And there were a lot of studies developed, but mainly by political scientists, on local and territorial public policies. The other factors, and also related to the period of the 1980s, is the development of European public policies. And in the 1990s, there was a new European treaty which was adopted, which gave a great impulse to the development of European public policies. And the public policies at the European level were mostly studied by political science. And what was also developed in political science, and Osmany already mentioned it, is that the stress on the ideas and with the cognitive approach, which was first developed at Grenoble, and which the main book published in 1987, L'État en action, The State in Action by Bruno Latour and Pierre Muller. And this was the main characteristic of the political science perspective on public policies. But this process was happened at the same time as what we can call a sociological turn in French political science. But at the same time, political science was in the process of autonomization to public law, because historically political science in France was rooted in public law, and it adopted sociological methods and sociological theories, and especially Bourdieu's approach, Bourdieu's sociological approach, sociology of fields, and progressively political science became political sociology, and we often define political science in France now as political sociology. So it means that there is no clear separation between sociology and political science on the topic and on the object of public policy. And also political science was a main trigger of the internationalization of French work, and the perspectives which are developed in France are not against American approach. They are discussing with American approach. They try to develop other concept in discussion with the American concept and trying to go further than some American approaches. And I just want to pinpoint that 8 years ago, the International Public Policy Association was created, and one of the main figures of this creation was a French colleague, Philippe Zitoun, who is the general secretary of this association since its creation, and it reflects the internationalization of French policy studies. So my last point, very quickly, is the notion of public action. Why do we use it in French? In French, so in France and in French. So it's not used in the Anglo-Saxon world. So it's based on a discussion which developed at the end of the 1990s, related also to the notion of governance, stressing the growing role of private actors in public policy, but also the increasing number of policy actors, the increasing complexity of public policy with not only public and private actors, but also actors at different levels, at the local level with decentralization, at the European level, but also at the international level. So talking of public action means that there is a loss of state centrality in public policy. So the second reason is also to pinpoint a loss of coherence in public policy because of this close interaction between public and private, multi-level public policy, but also more and more intersectorial issue, and also the growing politicization of several public policy issues. So, because the notion of public policy refers to some coherent program of action. Talking of public action stresses more that there is not necessarily a strong coherence in public policy because of this great diversity of actors. A last reason was that policy actors more used the term public policy, so using talking of public action was a way to underline that it is rooted in social science. So, and that leads, and this is my last word, to a new definition of public policy, defined in this perspective, in this political sociology perspective, defined as a process of collective construction by actors in interaction. So it is a constructivist and a relational perspective on the policy process. So most of the French perspective try to explain public policy by the role of ideas, so that's the constructivist dimension, and the interaction between several and very diverse policy actors. So that was my point. So Osmany, I don't know if we take questions now, or should we present the chapters?
There are only a few questions on our chat here, and all of them have already been answered by Osmany.
Hi, so I'm going to present now my chapter very briefly about policy circulation, and then Patrick is going to present also very briefly his chapter about elites, and then we are going to collect the questions. So we are, it's 10:45, 46. And I think we can have for maybe me and Patrick for more 20, maximum 30 minutes before taking the questions. So what I wanted to present to you now is the chapter number 15 of the book. I have already posted the link where you can find the book online on the YouTube chat. And it basically discusses the ideas of policy circulation and transnational comparison. So as Patrick mentioned previously, the transnational dimension of policies has been present in French policy studies for some time. This is in particular for two major empirical issues. First, the colonial legacy and the relation with Francophone Africa. And second, the impact of the European Union regional integration, especially after the 1980. In fact, the European Union started increasingly to play a role in domestic policies of countries through the harmonization of norms, incentives for subnational governments and organizations to engage in certain sectors, and of course, the circulation of ideas and models across countries. So, this is not only the transnational dimension is not only an element that we discuss in our chapter, but it's also one of the concerns of the areas of the French sociology of public action. If issues as decolonization and European integration have been for a long time of exclusive concern of the area of international relations, from a certain point on in France, it also started to be a concern of public policy studies. And in the book, we have also chapter 14, which is about global public policies, which is signed by Eve Fouilleux. Chapter 15, which is ours, and it was written by Madalena Hadzinski, Patrick Hassenteufel, and myself. And the chapter 16, which is about the European integration, which is written by Sophie Jacot and Laurie Boussaguet. So our chapter in particular is going to discuss how the French scholarship contributed to policy transfer studies. So policy transfer studies gained a lot of strength in the last years. Maybe it's one of the most popular issues in the international community of policy studies. And the movement in the area started to gain force, especially along the 90s and after the 2000s. Along the 90s, it was mostly around the notion of lesson drawing. And then in the 2000s, the notion of policy transfer was consolidated, in particular by an article published in Governance by David Dolowitz and David Marsh. So how does this area of studies developed in France? I'm going to just show a few elements, but obviously it's much more complex than what I'm presenting here. But you can have all the detail in the chapter. In France, this issue was discussed in the 90s, especially from the perspective of political science and comparative politics. There was a pioneer book published by Osmany, who brought the notions of transplant and rejection. He used the terms greffe and rejet. And he was using this to discuss institutional mimicry. Another trend, this trend was interested in the legal and administrative spheres, and it was attempting to identify the role of groups of specialists who practiced such institutional import and export of administrative elements. Another key to observe this type of process, this nature of phenomena, was the analysis of the role of African elites in the process of importing institutions from the West while building their states after the independences process. There's a famous book that became a milestone in the area in the 90s, which is called The State Imported, L'État Importé, which was published by Bertrand Badi. And there was also a third position in the area, which was more critical towards these ideas of import-export, which was prepared by Jean-François Bayard, who brought to the discussion the fact that institutions were subjected to multiple processes of reappropriation by all autochthonous groups when they were transferred or brought to Africa, for example, in the process of decolonization. So this understanding contributed to the integration and the inclusion of the idea of itinerary and the history of local contexts in the analysis of policies, how policies would move from one place to another. So, but this was mostly a discussion in political science. When we had this policy transfer turn in policy studies, and especially following the contribution of Dolowitz and Marsh in the international literature, these authors they posited some characteristics for policy transfers. So first, they were mainly studying the process of policy transfer. It had, in second place, a certain assumption about the linearity and the technicality of transfers. So transfers were moving from one place to another. Dolowitz and Marsh also proposed an inventory of agents who participated in the process of transfer. And obviously, we can find this in the publication of Governance in 2000. And they also placed some sort of rationality, albeit bounded rationality, as one of the determinants of the adoption. So French studies from the 2000 on started to engage with this literature. French studies in policy analysis, in policy studies, started to engage with this literature in policy, on policy transfer, the international literature. They were influenced by these perspectives, but they added some important elements as well to the studies. And here I'm going to mention only 4 elements, and obviously it's much more complex than this, and you can find everything in the chapter we wrote. But these elements will help us to understand the French touch to policy transfer studies. So in the first place, the scholars in the French debate criticized the idea of the linearity of policy transfer processes posed by the literature. They insisted on the fact that the public policy trips are complex, that they are permeated by disputes, by negotiations, the roundaway trips of policies. The agents are acting in different places. There are changes in meanings, ideas, among other elements. And they opted, even if this is not a consensus in the area, but many authors prefer to use the term policy circulation instead of policy transfer, because it would be more rich term to capture the complexity of such processes. And this was already a term present in sociology and in history, and it started to be used also in policy studies. The second element that was important in the French scholarship is the fact that they attach the importance to the transfer agents and the context where they operate. And here, Patrick is going to present a little more elements about this later. But here, the discussion inspired a lot, got a lot of inspiration from the sociology of elites, which were transposed into the transnational circulation. So the analysis of the elites started to take into consideration seriously the role of individual agents and how their trajectory, how their background, and how the ideas they defend in different places can shape policy circulation. The uses of the elites, the analysis of elites, was based on an in-depth researches on the individuals, following their trajectories and their biographical, their biography and so on. So understanding transfer agents, especially individuals, became a key issue to policy circulation studies. Some researchers drew heavily on the legacy of Pierre Bourdieu on elites. One example is the work of Yves Desalé and Bryant Garth, which you can have also in English. It's called The Globalization of Palace Wars, La Mondialisation des Guerres des Palais, where they are going to do a dense comparative study in Latin America, and they're going to follow the circulation of Latin American elites. And one of the statements, the arguments of this book is the link between social reforms in Chile during the Pinochet regime and the movement of elites outside the state, doing their PhDs in the University of Chicago, and then coming back to Chile and importing ideas and theories from the Chicago school and incorporating this into the state by assuming key positions in national politics once they go back to their own country. So this is one element, the understanding of the movement, the international circulation of individuals, which is an important factor to understand administrative reforms. Another type of concept which is often used by French scholars is the notion of programmatic actors. I'm not going to discuss deeply about this notion because Patrick is the main expert of this notion, and maybe he can present some insights on this. Even my own research, which was about participatory budgeting, received influence by these approaches. So in my own work, I followed for some years a group of people who helped to internationalize participatory budgeting from Porto Alegre here in Brazil to other cities in Latin America, Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I followed their trajectories and I identified their influence in internationalizing a local Brazilian policy. At the end, I developed the concept of ambassador of participatory budgeting, and I'm not going to go deeper in this matter here, but it's detailed in my book called Embaixadores da Participação. So the main contribution of the understanding of a better understanding of the agents is the fact that agents carry with them relations, professional backgrounds, worldview, a personal history, and they operate also in different contexts. That is the local context, the national context, the international context, and each context have different logics. And finally, the agents have different capacities and powers, as for example, language skills, knowledge, charisma, authority, and they are going to operate from different positions. The academia, civil society, government, international organizations, and so on and so on and so on. And this can be very relevant to shape the process of policy circulation. So the first contribution to transfer studies from the French perspective is this idea of the circulation. So it's not a linear movement. It's more complex than that. The second is the emphasis on agents, in particular the individuals. And I'm going to move now to the third and fourth contribution, which is related to the notion of instruments and the notion of translations. So on the one hand, these French studies are going to insist on the fact that what circulates are policy instruments. That is, devices that have not only a concrete part, but that also carries an abstract part. And the discussion on policy instrument is presented in our book in chapter number 2, that was signed by Charlotte Raupin, Patrick Legalet, and Pierre Lascum. And Charlotte is also going to be in our webinar cycle. So if you want to understand more about policy instruments, don't miss this webinar that's going to happen in the future. You can find the program at the site of ENAP and the social media of Labopi. So going back to the contribution of the instruments in policy circulation studies, the idea was that instruments can have this abstract component, which is related to an idea, a political project, a meaning, and so on. And it can also have a concrete part of it that can be related to a norm, an institutional design, a specific methodology, an index, and so on. And the fourth point that I wanted to mention here is the contribution of the sociology of translation, in particular with the work of Michel Foucault and Bruno Latour. And the notion of translation allows scholars to go deeper in a few elements of the transnationalization process. So first, the space where the meaning of a policy is produced. The second is the configuration of agents and their interaction. And finally, it's institutionalizations. So all these elements can be related to different aspects of how a policy is changed, adapted, and transformed while it circulates from one place to another, or while it is carried by one agent or another. So in the first place, we have the idea of the text translation, the literary analysis, and the literary translation. The second, we have the issue of the problematization, the re-problematization of policies, the negotiation, the mobilization of actors or agents to legitimize a policy, and finally, the idea, the moment where an idea or a policy is finally institutionalized. So, including this dimension of the translation of policy instruments, this means that, or allows us to understand policy circulation as a movement, a complex movement, where instruments are transformed both in their abstract and technical or concrete component throughout the process of circulation, and their and the agents, each agent can give his or her own touch into the policy according to their worldview or their interaction with the group or the context they are operating, and so on and so on. So this brings some complexity and some sociological depth and density to the analysis of how policies moves across borders. So I don't want to take much time because I want to give also the space for Patrick to talk a little bit about his chapter on elites. And I'll stop here. And after that, we can move to after Patrick, we can collect the questions. So thank you very much. And Patrick, I'll now hand it over to you for your short presentation of your chapter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Osmany. So I think that I will try to be rather fast, because there are some points you already mentioned and developed. I'm just again, I lost the presentation. Sorry. There it is. Okay, because the chapter I wrote with my colleague William Genies is also focused on policy actors, and one kind of policy actors, policy elites, and there was a rather strong focus in French policy studies on policy elites, and especially on state elites, on elites linked to the state, and focus on administrative elite. And this is strongly related to the role of the state, not only in public policy but also in politics. The so-called strong state characterization of the French state. This is the classical distinction, the sociology of the state, between weak and strong states, and French state characterized as a strong state. So what I will show quickly is first that there is a tradition of sociological studies on state elites, on this kind of a policy elite, but it was only later that the dimension of public policy was introduced in the analysis of state elites. And last, I will say a few words on the approach I developed with my colleague William, and based on the notion of programmatic actor. But this characterization of, this notion of programmatic actor is deeply rooted in studies of state elites. the sociology of state elites developed in the 1960s, and it was also a critical perspective against more law-oriented perspective and also the administrative science tradition in France. So this sociological work stressed three aspects. The first one is the importance of the higher education system. I already mentioned that, this duality of the higher education system in France with specific training path for senior civil servants and state engineers. So they are not trained in universities. They are trained in specific institutions outside the universities and with a separation with academic research. And this gives a specific identity to these groups, and they are also organized in administrative with specific administrative identities, and deeply related to these schools. The second dimension, which is stressed in the sociological work on the state elites, is the importance of the social reproduction process, and Bourdieu worked a lot on these people and used the notion of a state, kind of a state aristocracy, because of the importance of the social reproduction of senior civil servants in top position of the state. And the third perspective, which was analyzed more in the power elite perspective, the process of circulation between different positions of power, between administrative position, between political position, and between economic position in the private sector or in public enterprise. And what is especially stressed in the French literature is the role of senior civil servants in politics as members of political staff, especially in the executive, but also then as ministers and as head of the executive, as head of government, and even president. And our current president was trained in that kind of school and is by career a senior civil servant. And he has also circulated in the private sector. But all this bunch of work didn't stress the public policy I mentioned. This was introduced by other studies in the 1970s. Some of them strongly related to the sociology of organization, then more to the cognitive approach that I already mentioned, focusing on ideas. And all these studies stressed the role of specialized administrative groups, called Grand Corps in France, and in French, their role in the modernization policies conducted by the state in from the 1950s to the 1970s to the oil crisis in the 1970s. But then other studies concerning another period, the period of the 1980s and then the 1990s, also stress that in what many authors, not only in France, have called the neoliberal turn of public policies, and especially economic policies. In France, this main paradigmatic change in economic policies was also strongly influenced by senior civil servants, the state economists, economists inside the state and not outside the state, coming from the private sector or coming from universities. And that it means that even if there was a strong neoliberal turn in French public policies. This turn was still conducted by actors coming from the state, what was also stressed in studies of the reforms of the state administration or reform in social policies. And this is the policy field we worked on with William Geniès, and in the studies we made starting in the late 90s, we used the notion of programmatic actors, because the main idea was that these actors can be characterized by the shaping of a policy change program, so that we are also in the cognitive perspective, that showing that there are informal groups of reformers which are structured around a policy change program, and that these actors are involved in a competition for legitimate authority in power struggles inside the state. So that notion, which was first used in studies concerning France, or in the social security sector, in health policies, and then also for defense policies, then it was extended, and we tried to elaborate it more theoretically in discussion with other notions used in the Anglo-Saxon, especially in the American literature. So these actors are collective actors, not individuals like policy entrepreneurs or policy brokers. They are structured by a program, by a policy change program, not by pre-existing institution or by only a policy instrument. The instruments are part of the program, but a program is broader than a policy instrument. It has also a policy orientation. It has also it is also based on a critical analysis of previous public policies, and it's also related to institutional reforms, changing the power position of the different actors. So this is also why programmatic actors are different from instrument constituency or groups involved in transfer, like the policy ambassadors Osmany mentioned, and he worked on this kind of actors, but these actors are focused on one kind of policy instrument. So they are structured around a broader policy change program. And also a third characterization, more general characterization of these actors, is that they have a collective strategy and identity. And this is different with policy networks and advocacy coalition, who are much looser aggregation of actors with actors who can have different interests. So these actors are a common goal, and which is especially a political goal. They are trying to gain power in the policy process. And the last characterization, the fact that they are involved in the different stages of the policy process. And this is a difference with another very important notion concerning groups in public policy, the notion of epistemic communities, because they are mostly involved in policy formulation. But programmatic groups are involved in formulation, in the decision process, and also in the implementation, with strong position in new institution directing the implementation process. And the other main point of this approach, because we characterize it as a new framework, because it is only based on a specific methodology. I don't have the time to develop the methodology. You can find it in the chapter and other references. But the characteristic of this framework is to combine two kind of methods coming from the sociology of elites, and there are different methods which are presented here, but I won't comment them because I don't have enough time. But also methods more related to sociological policy studies on the discourse, but also use a lot of interviews and trying to explain the resources of these actors. So we're trying to understand together three interconnected dimensions: the trajectory, the professional trajectories of these actors in a policy field or in a policy domain, the cognitive and discursive dimension, and their intervention in the decision, especially in the decision-making process, but also in the, of course, in the formulation and implementation process. So I conclude by stressing that this framework is based on studies concerning France and in discussion with the works on senior civil servants in France and their role in public policy. But we have tried to elaborate it as a more general framework, which can be used for other policy sectors than the first sectors we worked on, and also on other countries. And we developed comparative works with other colleagues, and there are also even works on Latin American countries, including Brazil. And recently, a special issue on the Programmatic Action framework was published by the journal European Policy Analysis, which is a journal which tries to promote approaches which are slightly different from the American approaches. So it's a journal created by European scholars and trying to promoting different approaches, discussing with American approaches. So you have the reference, and that special issue was just published. And in the special issue, you can find there is one article taking a Brazilian case. So that's it. Thank you very much. So maybe I will also put the reference of the special issue in the chat. But now we have several questions. I think that we can open the discussion after this a little bit too long presentation.
We have many questions already in our chat box here in our Zoom channel. First of all, there's a question that is addressed to Professor Osmany. It comes from Cleverson Domingos. He is at the University of Brasilia at the Educations Institute. And he asks, how do you see, how could be the use of the political sociology of public action approach in the Brazilian context? And he follows, is there any perspective of consolidation of this approach here in Brazil? And he finishes asking you, what would be the relevance, the importance of the political sociology of public action for the analysis of the Brazilian public policies?
Oh, okay. Should we reply all to one by one, or we collect more?
I think we can group in clusters of 3 questions. What do you think?
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Okay. So the following group of questions will come from Renato Barbosa. He's at the University of São Paulo and the Health Institute. And he addresses the question to you, Osmany. In the field of collective health, there are some studies that use the political sociology approach in the investigation of the relation between the state and the new or brand new social movements of identity groups, as defined by Maria da Glória Gon. And he asks you about the participation and the social control of the health public policies. Okay? And there is another question here addressed to, in fact, it's not addressed to any of you. I think it's addressed to both of you. That comes from Tabi Faki. And I don't know if it is a he or a she, but the question follows as, with the financial capitalism, how can we think about the public policy analysis from the view of more cognitive approaches, but not forgetting to consider some more structural elements? The floor is yours.
Oh, okay. Should I start and then hand over to Patrick?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. So let's. I'm going to react quickly to this question. So first, thank you very much for being with us for such a long time and for asking very inspiring questions and challenging questions as well. I counted so far 46 people watching us on here on Zoom, and more 27 on YouTube. So it's I really thank all the audience for your interest and for joining us today. So Cleverson, first question: if the field is the consolidation of the French approaches and how to use it in public policy, to analyze public policies in Brazil. So what we can say is that it's very interesting how this studies started to gain more attraction in Brazil. 10 years ago, when I was doing my PhD, we basically didn't talk much. We didn't talk much about this kind of approaches. Also, they were not that internationalized as they are today. I think that one of the elements that collaborated to its internationalization, it was also the engagement and the coordination of French scholars to internationalize their approaches. Maybe Patrick can give more insights on this matter, but I think that the French scholars were very proactive in creating discussions among them and trying to give some characteristics, or what is called the French touch, to policy studies, and also to internationalize these approaches. So this certainly helped to the diffusion of these approaches, and now it is easier. It's easier to use them because they're also available in English and so on. So now we have more and more uses of these approaches in Brazil. Also, different scholars have been doing their journeys of the residences, their postdocs or periods of residence during their postgraduate or research studies in France, and they're also more excited about this approaches. So we have now an important community that have been using such approaches in Brazil. Also, the notion of public action have been used more widely in Brazil now. And in the book, you can find different examples of how to use these approaches to understand Brazilian public policies. Our idea also in the book was to force the authors to think about how can this be applied to other contexts. And if you can see, for example, I think it's chapter 10, it was written by Carla Tomasini, and she discusses how we can use the approach of the ideas to understand the conditional cash transfers like Bolsa Família in Brazil. So this is, you can find this is a very interesting. Also the programmatic actors that Patrick just mentioned can be an insightful way to think about Brazilian policies. What else? You can also see the circulation of groups and individuals between state agencies or governmental organizations, and you can read this through the approaches of the circulation of elites and so on. So there are plenty of forms to use it to Brazilian public policies. The second question that was addressed to me from Renato. So thank you, Renato, for this question. To my knowledge, I don't know anyone you asked in particular the use of this the social public action approaches to the new social movements. I don't know anyone doing this in Brazil. What I know is that in the field of health, because you asked about health, that there was a group of students of Professor Daisy Ventura from the University of São Paulo that were studying the responses to address the Zika virus in Brazil from the perspective of policy instruments. So this is the information that I have. There's also a very rich discussion in the sociology of public action that unfortunately we couldn't bring to the book, which is the discussion about social participation and social control that you might be interested of. And unfortunately, we don't have in the book, but certainly Magali Nonjon and Alice Mazot, who wrote the chapter on the professionals of public policies, they brought some insights of this area, and you could have a look and see if this can interest you as well. And finally, I'm going to conclude because I don't want to take much time and give the floor to Patrick. The question of Tami about the financial capitalism. There's a very interesting discussion in the French, the sociology of public action, French studies about the standardization of practices and how the widespread of capitalism and is standardizing practices of and modes of action in public policies and governments. And this can be a very interesting way to think about your question and the cognitive elements of the sociology of public action. So what are the the ideas, the worldviews, the political projects behind these policies that are being standardized by financial capitalism related actions or mindsets. And so these are my answers.
Maybe I can add something very, very shortly on this point. Maybe another kind of answer to the question. It is what you raised the issue of role of agency and structural elements. I want to stress two points. The first one is that, of course, the cognitive approach, the role of ideas, is not disconnected from the structural dimension, but in for instance, the programmatic action framework, and then also other French studies on public policies, they are rooted in what we can call a strategic constructivism, combining the role of ideas with the role of strategies and the power issue. That means that what you have to take in account is not only the way actors interpret structural evolution, but also how they make strategic usages of this structural evolution. So there is interpretation and strategic use, and but also taking into account the resource dimension in the analysis of policy actors, and resources are, of course, also linked to structural elements. So there is no disconnection between agency and structure.
Thank you very much, Osmany and Patrick. To our next cluster of questions, there comes a question from Denise Direito. She said she's very happy to see you again, Patrick. And the question she poses is, how can we understand, considering the French approaches, what is happening in Brazil today? In some areas, what is happening is not a rearrangement of public policy, but a dismantling or the construction of some fields. She asked you. What did the theory miss? Do we fail to recognize the centrality of the government and its power to make major changes or the constructions in public action? And following, there comes a question from Julia Mafra. She asks she wants to know if there are more examples of governments that have used the approach of the political sociology of public action on formulation or fabrication process in order to design public policy. And also there comes a question from Alexandre Gomidi, he's from IPEA, and he asks you, what are the main methodological differences between the traditional Anglo-Saxon approaches to public policy with the French approach of public action? The floor is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, that's three different questions. Concerning the question of Denise, hello Denise. She was hosted a few months in my research institute just before the pandemic. Yes, what she raises the role of government, the role of politics in public policy, and which seems to be rather contradictory with the what I mentioned about public action with a lot of different actors and a lot of complexity, and a kind of a re-centralization of the policy process through political actors. So, of course, that's a rather new and different evolution, but the relation I can make with the perspective is that it is a political science perspective, and if we do not speak about not only sociology of public action, but political sociology of public action, that means also taking into account the political dimensions and the power structure, but also political institution and political actors. So and these political actors and the current Brazilian government has also a kind of a policy program, or at least for political goals related to public policy, but with also ideas. Maybe these ideas could seem a little bit strange, but I think that the strategic constructivist perspective, stressing the importance of the power issue, could give a good framework to understand that kind of evolution. If I agree, it's a kind of a governmentalization of public policy, and rather different from the governance perspective. The second question on the question of, is it possible to use that approach to design public policy? I'm not sure that it's not a kind of approach aiming to help to policy design, but what I can observe in the current period is that concerning policy evaluation, there are some policy evaluation which are conducted by the French state, and I am partly involved in that kind of evaluation that are more process-oriented evaluation, not on the impact evaluation, but more trying to understand what doesn't work in the policy process. And the political sociology of public action perspective can help to identify problems, deadlocks in the policy process, and to understand, to identify which are the most relevant actors, what actors are missing or not playing the role they could or they should play. So at least for policy evaluation, there is a usage of that kind of perspective. So that's a rather recent evolution. Maybe also in the formulation process, political scientists or political sociologists are involved in a discussion or an expert committee, and there is also a better position of social scientists in some policy formulation commission, not only economists or lawyers. So the last point is on the method. I'm sure that I got the question right. Yes, it was the difference between the methods used in France and the methods used.
Methodological approaches, the methodological differences between the Anglo-Saxon approaches to the French approach of public action.
So there are, of course, same kind of methods that are shared, but in France, there is a stronger focus on qualitative fieldwork than in the many Anglo-Saxon work, which are more using quantitative methods, even if there's more and more combination of methods. But because of this, especially this focus on policy and policy actors, there is a greater use of a diversity of qualitative method. For instance, several work, and I think Vincent Dubois will present it in the webinar, and at least it's in a chapter, using observation, using ethnographical approach, so for understanding from the bottom policy implementation.
Thank you so much. Osmany, would you like to?
I think I'll just add a footnote to what Patrick said on the question of methods, because it's a very interesting question, and we bring this in the book in the first chapter, and you can also see in other chapters as well when authors present their specific way to analyze the public policies from their own perspective. So I think that first, Patrick said that but I wanted to insist on the fact that there are shared methods. So it's not French approaches are, or political sociology of public action is like this, and then there's something completely different, which is the Anglo-Saxon approaches. So in the preface, Pierre Muller explains this very clearly, how the French scholarship was built engaging with the Anglo-Saxon scholarship, which is also common for other countries. But I think that something that is very distinctive that we should stress here is the use of ethnography and the observation of the micro dynamics. So it's obviously often researchers do lots of interviews and participant observation, but the sociology of public action is also about reporting the microdynamics, the details, and giving the density to the processes. So I think this is one of the features that are often they're not very often present in the Anglo-Saxon policy studies. This very use of sociological and anthropological strategies to understand how public policies are produced or fabricated. That is going to the field and watching the day-to-day life of agents advocating for a policy or things or other phenomena of this nature. So I think this is something that should be stressed, and the book is it's going to bring this in different moments. For example, the chapter of Philippe Zitoun about the pragmatic approach, he's going to discuss how to observe the practice of agents and how this is important to understand policy, the fabrication of policy. This is the term he used, the fabrication of policy. So this is what I wanted to add.
Thank you so much, Osmany. Your remarks are really useful here. For our last round of questions, all of them are for Patrick to answer first. Isabella Diaz from the Health Secretariat of Minas Gerais. She asks you, are there examples of the use of the political sociology of public action to reduce health calamities and how to meet those who need it most? The first question. She follows, unfortunately, our policies are still very immediate. Is it possible to start using this approach in the short term? She asks about the difference between a long-term or a short-term point of view. Zilma Borges from Fundação Getúlio Vargas at São Paulo, she asks you, considering the French movements like Gilets jaunes and other kind of movements in the civil society, would it be possible to say that these are some kind of collective actions, phenomena that influence new perspectives of construction in public policies? And finally, Luis França from the University, the Federal University of Pernambuco, he asks you, in spite of the growth, the presence of private actors in public policy, and so we have a downside of the state. In your studies, you see that there are some autonomy of these private actors in the performance of their functions in the public functions, or is the presence of the state still fundamental to the regulation of these actors? I think he might be talking about the consequences of the new public management and considering the state as a problem. I think the question goes something around that. If the state is still important, or has it lost its centrality?
Yeah, thank you for this very interesting but difficult questions. Yeah, concerning the use of the approach of these approaches, because it's more a broad perspective, but with different approaches, how could they be used in the short term for policy responses? Concerning the issue which is put forward in the question concerning health and concerning also the people who are who could get the benefits from a public policy. For this kind of issue, I think that the way implementation studies are used in France, and especially using the anthropological approach Osmany just mentioned, I think that they can be useful to have a better targeting of public policy on people who need most benefits from a public policy program concerning social policy or health policies. So concerning health, for instance, and the policy evaluation can be based on very precise empirical work concerning the beneficiaries of the policy. So on the implementation, the kind of implementation studies which are conducted in France based on sociological and anthropological approaches can have a rather short-term usage in public policy. Concerning the role of collective action, so collective action and policy change, as we had this important social movements just before the COVID-19 pandemic, with the gilets jaunes, the yellow vests. But it's the role of collective action is not a new phenomenon in France. We have a long tradition of collective action. What was rather new in that movement is that the fact that it was really outside trade unions, for instance, but also outside traditional political organization, and that also a movement which blurred the cleavage between the right and left, which is very structuring in French at the political level. So, but as other social movements, it has indeed an impact on policy orientation. At least in the first, the first consequence was a strong impact on the policy agenda, and this is usually the role of social movements, having an impact on the policy agenda, but also on the withdrawal of some policy measures. But I think it's a bit too early to say that it has led to a main policy reorientation. But also because of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is another kind of crisis, and which has also an impact on public policy orientation. But because of the strong collective action tradition in France, and also the strong collective action capacity of trade unions and of other actors, collective action is included in the study of the policy process, and I think it's also one of the reasons for the importance of the political sociology perspective, because sociology of collective action was mostly developed in political science, and it was also one of the topics which has helped to sociologize political science. It was, and it's one of the main subfield of political sociology in France. And more work combine sociology of collective action and sociology of the policy process. The last question was on private actors and managerial reforms coming from the private sector in France, and what is its impact on France? So France, like the other European countries, but also all around the world, was affected by the transfer, the diffusion of new public management. But in the comparative studies made on the administrative reforms, you see that in France they are going less far towards privatization than in other countries, and showing a kind of a resistance of the state tradition, and also the other elements which I want to stress is the fact that these reforms, so even managerial reforms or neoliberal reforms I mentioned in my presentation, are made by actors coming from the state. And even if you look at the profile of the consultants, some of them are coming from the state. They are trained senior civil servants. So there was a circulation between public and private, and it doesn't only mean the privatization of the state, but also kind of a statization of the private sector. So there are always strong links between both, and it also, and it helps to explain that why managerial reforms and privatization have not gone that far, or so far in France than in other countries. And of course, the current context of the pandemic is also giving back a role of the state. So there's a strong focus on the role of the state in the current context.
Osmany, do you have anything to add?
No, I'm perfectly fine with the answers of Patrick. I just wanted to say a few words before we conclude, when we are going to conclude.
Okay, so we can proceed to the conclusions.
Okay. So I wanted to thank everyone for being here today, and for your interest in the book. The book is already available in PDF for your download in the ENAP library, and we are going to be here again next week. So I think so it's going to be on the 27th of May at 10 Brazilian time, 3 p.m. Paris time, and we will have that week a webinar about gender studies, the pragmatic approach in public action. We'll have Philippe Zitoun and Guy-Noël Perrier. It's going to be very interesting, and I strongly encourage you to participate in this webinar and in the next ones. If you miss it, it's going to be on Labopi YouTube channel, but only in English. Yes, I think that's it from my part.
Patrick, any concluding remarks?
No, we are perfectly on time, and yes, we have a cycle of 5 webinars. So I will be back also next week to share the second webinar. So thank you very much for all your very stimulating questions, and even more for your interest on the perspective we are developing in France, but not only in France. We are discussing with, of course, colleagues from other countries, and especially from Brazil.
Also, I would like to thank also Regina and all the staff of ENAP again for all the hard work done in the past weeks. I must say that it was a marathon to get this done, and we really appreciate the space you are offering to us for promoting the book and sharing knowledge on public policy studies. This is really important and of an inestimable value. So thank you very much for everyone, in particular in the name of Regina, but all the staff that was with us until we arrived today with the book and the beginning of the webinars.
Thank you very much for your trust and your participation. It is our pleasure, our honor to have you here and to host such high-level debate on public policy analysis. And to all of us, all of you that are watching us on the Labopi YouTube channel, do not forget to enroll for the next webinars. As we've already told you, at the Zoom channel, at the Zoom room, we have many other options for accessibility and so on, and also for you to feel a little bit more with us. We are apart, but it doesn't mean that we have to be far from you. Thank you very much. Osmany, there is one last question that is really important. I'd like you to answer it. It is about the print version of the book.
Okay, so the print version of the book. So I received the first proofs yesterday from the graphic house that's going to print it, and it's still the other amount of printed versions is going to be available soon, but we still for at this moment we only have we don't have a high number of copies. So at this moment we will have only the copies for the libraries of the universities that we are going to send the printed copy as soon as the universities start to open in Brazil. We are going to share more information about the printed version of the book in maybe a couple of weeks or 1 month from now. Certainly by the end of the webinars, we will have more information about the printed version of the book. Until then, you can enjoy the PDF, the digital version.
So now it's a goodbye, or better, it's a see you soon. Next week, we will have Patrick Hassenteufel hosting the next seminar, and we hope to see you all here. So goodbye, and see you next week.
Bye.
Olá, Osmany, parabéns, todo mundo.